Hey writers, Megan Barnhart here. It is my day 18 of NaNoWriMo update. And today I want to talk about writing yourself into a hole. So have you ever done it? I'm curious. I'd love to hear comments from you. What does that feel like? I love connecting with other authors on Instagram. If you want to connect with me, I'm at Write with Megan. And one of my writing buddies just this morning was saying, hey, this is kind of the first day of Nano. I feel like I just don't want to do it. And he said, I have 131 words and I feel like I've dug myself into a hole. And if I'm bored with my story, the reader will be bored. So gotta fix it. What do you do when you dig yourself into a writing hole? And I read that earlier today, and I don't know, maybe it did something to my brain because I realized I kind of started writing myself into a hole. So I want to show you what I did and why it's not the end of the world, and what you can do if you feel like either you're writing yourself into a hole or the direction you're going just isn't fruitful. It isn't feeling right. So I started in writing, and I got to like this character starting to go into detail and tell another character all about an experience, and goes on, and I realized, like, I got this much into it and then realized, wait a minute, this is going to be problematic because if Mrs. Purdy knows this at this point, it will impact the choices that she's already made, because I'm going back and writing a scene that is earlier on in the narrative. Now that I've gotten the shape of my story and I've written my climactic moment and I've written my final chapter, I'm going back and filling in some of the gaps. So I wrote this and I was like, oh, this won't work. I just wrote myself into a plot hole, basically. Like, there's a plot hole and I just kept digging it further and further, because if this happens now, so much other stuff won't make sense later. So as you can see, I didn't delete it from my 750 words, which is where I have been writing every day. I just made space and hit enter and came back in and kept going. And it was like right in the middle of a paragraph. So I had like Iphigenia explaining why she has been gone, right? So Mrs. Purdy's like, I don't believe in dilly-dallying. And the first way I had it was Iphigenia was going to be like, oh, okay, but something happened, and then tell this whole story. I was like, oh, that won't work. So instead I just have her say, I'm sorry, ma'am. And then there's a conversation where she kind of hints that there's something wrong, right? Like, if someone were to overhear about bad things being done, what should she do? And then Mrs. Purdy's reaction, which is like, she should mind her own business. You're in enough trouble as it is, girly. So Iphigenia keeps her lip zipped. So that's what I did right in the moment. I didn't stop and erase, but I did stop and pivot and change directions. So what do I do with that writing now that I'm done getting my words in? I go over to my draft doc. I go down to the bottom after I have the heading for my last chapter, and I put in a line and I write storage, because who knows what this might be useful for. Everything that I'm writing is giving me more insight about my characters' voices, about who they are, about what they want and need and fear. And so I don't want to lose that. Maybe there's a gem that I'll pull out of here and fit into a different scene with Mrs. Purdy. Or, maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe she will tell her at this point. So I want to leave my options open. But I know that the way the narrative is right now, this wasn't working. So all it takes is to stop, change direction, and then not make a judgment about what you have. Just leave it, throw it into a storage area, and decide what you want to do with it later. It might be that I will use that for something later on in my story. And it might also be that there will be some writing project in the future where I will be inspired, and maybe this scene will turn into a scene with different people in a different story. I really am a writing hoarder. I don't like to throw writing away, but when you think about how little space it costs you to just save things, I think it's well worth it. So if you're feeling stuck, either because you're writing yourself into a hole like I was, where I was like, oh, wait, I'm actually creating this plot hole as we speak, or you just start writing and you get, a few hundred words in and you're like, I'm not feeling this. Pause, pivot. You can always just grab a free write, jump to another scene, and write what you feel you can write right then in that moment. Drafting energy is powerful energy. Use it to write what you can in the moment, and don't get bogged down with, oh, that's not the scene I thought I was going to write, or, this is different than I thought it might be. That's perfectly fine. This is really advice for when you're creating those plot holes or you're finding resistance. You're trying to write forward and it's just not working because the scene is not calling to you. That's when I'd recommend pause, pivot, and then throw that stuff into storage. So I hope you find that tip helpful, and I wish you, as always, happy writing.